for me, it's around how they are empowering their middle managers to see the impact that they're making. A lot of time, providers, either community care or residential, put a lot of pressure on their middle leaders. And when they put that pressure on, they're providing them with redesigned KPIs, expecting them to redesign projects or get new people involved or exit and redesign and restructure complete teams. So having that lens around how you're empowering your team to have those discussions and allow them time to reflect and practice those discussions. And if it's not within your own organisation, how are you creating those safe spaces for them to go to their own peers or organisations like mine, or other mentors in their network, so that they feel like they have the tools that they need to get that job done. And they don't feel guilty about it, because when a CEO has these types of situations, they most likely get coaching, they get support, and they have the chair to lean on. They have a very strong CEO network of peers. And if we're not creating that for our middle managers or those in the senior leadership team, then you're not building in an effective leadership pipeline and building a really strong succession network.
Today's conversation is one I've been looking forward to. There's a lot happening in aged care at the moment. Workforce pressure, leadership gaps, expectations continuing to rise. But what's often not spoken about enough is where that pressure actually lands. It doesn't sit at the top. It doesn't sit at the bottom. It sits in the middle. The people holding teams together, making decisions in real time, carrying responsibility without always having the structure around them to support it. Today, I'm speaking with someone who has spent years working closely with leaders across the sector, seeing firsthand what's actually happening on the ground. This is a conversation about what's really happening underneath the surface and what needs to change if we want the system to work, not just function. Samantha, thanks for joining me. You spent a number of years working closely with leaders across the sector, building programs, supporting teams, and seeing firsthand what actually holds and what doesn't. I think a good place to start is there. What are you seeing on the ground right now that others might not and are missing?
Well, it's a really interesting question, because a lot of what gets discussed in our industry publications and also within the sector, in mass media like the ABC or other news publications, is either frontline pressures, where people who are receiving care, there's a lot of genuine issues that need to be resolved. And I've also been part of conversations and seen that being discussed around what executives and the boards and government are creating and what pressures are up in those tiers. But the one that is continually on my mind is around those that hold the teams together and those that are the middle managers, because they're the ones that have to absorb the pressures from both of those angles and ensure that they're not only delivering on those outcomes, but translating the language across all of those different tiers, understanding and also providing not only support to the system and to the organisation, but also providing that great leadership that they have inside them to ensure that the leadership travels in both directions and that communication is really put in place.
It's very well said. It's a very sort of unspoken about subject, but you're very right. If we look at some organisations, they're very top heavy and executives and the support. You look at the care stuff, and again, whilst there could be more support, the middle management seem to have this kind of you should be okay, you should be resilient sort of thing, where there isn't that much support. Often, when I previously worked in residential aged care, we would have regional managers come to support facility managers, but they'd be on Zoom the whole day. So they'd be there by their presence, but not really supporting or understanding, more of a tick in the box. I was at, this side today.
And it's really interesting because, I mean, I would challenge and say that there is so much support out there. It's just, where is the capacity being built in for them to absorb it and for them to practice and reflect so that they can then actually understand what it is that they're meant to be delivering and understand the different contexts and how they can push back or how they can change the delivery models that they've been asked to do so that they can do it in a way that aligns to their leadership style, that aligns to the clients and the people that are receiving care, and also supports the front line as best as possible.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very difficult. Like you've mentioned, there is a lot of support and resources, but I think there needs to be that understanding that people can't always run with something. They're busy with business as usual, or it could be reacting to a clinical incident or an unhappy family member or resident, or there could be pressures from head office. So if they're essentially just given a piece of paper of results of an audit, it's going to sit in the top drawer.
Yeah, and to distill it even further, it's not that the workforce is lacking tools. They have so much. It's just they're so overwhelmed that they can't absorb what's being offered and they can't translate it quickly enough to really support the people that need the support. So
that's right. It's interesting. I was speaking to a psychologist, and it's almost as if, that middle management are in that kind of fight and flight mode where some of them unfortunately fly in and then they leave and that's it. This is too hard. I'm walking away. But the ones that are there, it's just reactive because they can't, interpret the support that's been given to them. Like you said rightly, they can't absorb it because they're just so also, I guess, immune to what's the next problem. What's the next problem? Oh, someone wanted to help. Okay.
Yeah, and I've been in those roles too, where you get given so much, or you've been told that you have the decision-making power to actually deliver on this project. But then when you report up or a funding cycle changes or the lens changes in some way, then that decision-making gets taken off you and you're left holding a program which you're meant to have responsibility for, and then it's no longer what it was promised.
That's right. It's sometimes it seems like the goalposts are always sort of shifting, which makes it difficult. I followed you a lot on LinkedIn and seen a few of your posts, and you've spoken a lot about working isn't the same as holding. Can you unpack that a bit?
Yeah. So really, from my own experience, I've really led not only my own leadership programs, but also national leadership programs for others. And especially a time comes to mind from during the COVID days, where I was supporting hundreds of leaders from East Coast to West Coast, north of Australia to south of Australia. And there was really strong content that was there. There was a real community with real outcomes. And the whole thing worked really, really well. But it hinged on me being the interpreter, the one who facilitated. I had to craft a lot of the marketing materials because people weren't understanding how this community that was built was different from a lot of the other cohorts that were around at the time. And it worked because I was the face, and we built it that way as well. And not only was it during COVID days, it was also during the Aged Care Royal Commission. So there was a lot of different things that were happening. And with what was occurring then is I had to hold it so strongly. And what ended up happening was I then burnt out. And that really, really solidified for me that working in something and building it and ensuring that you had a community that could run and hold a lot of the spaces. What then happened was when I had to step back because I couldn't continue because of all of these different factors and the burnout that I was experiencing, it then ended up just sort of fizzling away. So that was a really big program, but these do occur in very small ways across all these different organisations where we have amazing people who are deeply embedded in their communities, really understand the stakeholders, not only those that are receiving care, are the care providers and the family members, but also have a really strong understanding of the funding background. But there's so much turnover in our sector that once that key person leaves, that the initiative can then really fall flat, either lose the funding, lose the support of the community, or just lose support within the organisation itself, and it just never continues.
You're right. There's always, and especially from a recruitment perspective, and speaking specifically about facility managers, there always seems to unfortunately have this kind of, oh, it's a revolving door. There's such a high turnover in the role. And I can recall addressing staff when I was a facility manager myself, and staff, you can't blame them, but they said, oh, that's what the last person said. I'm going to be here. I'm going to support you. And, blink and you close your eyes and that person's gone, or their face hasn't fit the picture. I think, I've always said for a long time to staff as well, and it's so important to get their buy-in, but, it's about trying to deliver on providing those outcomes. And you're one of those key core groups. The staff are a massive core group to deliver outcomes and make the workplace a better place, make sure they leave happier than how they arrived, and also the residents, the families. But I think a key component is the amount of administrative burden and the amount of compliance, which can sometimes come across as you're being difficult or you're tasking someone, but really it's legislation, it's compliance that you have to deliver upon. And you can have a personality about it and a nice character, but it just needs to be done. So
that's right. Yeah, and it's what the tension that you're holding there is, how do you embody your role and deliver above and beyond? Because you always go in, well, for me, and I'm sure for a lot of the people that you're involved with and are within our own networks, is we always want to go above and beyond and deliver so much we can, so that the people who need it, those who are our older adults in the communities and the families that are supporting them, they deserve more than they're getting. And we want to not be the person that's the stoppage. We want to build a great community that supports not only them on the front line, but everyone in between them, all the way up to the board. But if there is something that is promised to us and isn't delivered on, then how can you hold that space and hold the truth for the people that you're working with, and be part of challenging a system and not becoming that roadblock? It's always that really strong tension. And for me, that's about having a great community to really talk about those roadblocks with, and having a great group of mentors, and also having a system that can really communicate why things are occurring. And if we don't have those spaces because people are too busy, there's too much change happening, or there's no space, or maybe the leaders that you're around don't want to create that space for you, that's where a lot of the tension can sit.
You're right. You made a really valid point there. And my phone a friend was a very strong facility manager, but it was that sounding board that you have, right? So sometimes because there is so much tension, you're second guessing yourself. And you'd call up your colleague and say, hey, look, just want to run this by you. And it could be the most mundane thing. And they'd say, yeah, of course. Yeah, that's right. But they understand that stress, that pressure. And it's interesting speaking to emerging facility managers or facility managers who have been in the post for a decade or even longer, and you say to them, you have this, I call it the magical list. You have this list that you write at the start of the day that you want to achieve, with maybe 10 items, and you might get 2 or 3 done. Such is the role. And I think we need to look at ways to definitely empower the middle management, but also empower them in a way that it's sustainable, but not. I feel like sometimes KPIs are a bit cruel in the way that, I remember once we were sitting at a nice lunch in Sydney, and there was the operations manager, and it was a pretty big aged care provider, 50 plus homes, and one of the facility managers said to the operations manager, so, what do we get if we pass accreditation? And she turned around and said, you keep your job. And I thought, yeah, right, okay. So it was just not, you might get a lunch out for your team or there might be, I don't know, an increased budget to improve the lifestyle of the home or something, or the words that I never heard as a manager, which was time in lieu. It was you keep your job. So I think it was that kind of that kind of realization that certain cultures within organizations and how we convey, our leadership styles is really important.
Yeah, but I mean, what a missed opportunity for that manager to, instead of saying this is what you get, it's saying let's reframe that question to this. That helps us build the culture that we're looking to actually instill, not just to meet the bare minimum, which is passing accreditation, but what's that next step that I want you guys to start aiming for? It's just a missed opportunity for that person to really help the facility managers build that little bit of a stretch and help them build a new language.
Correct. I can recall, we can always, throughout life, we can always recall a really good experience or a bad experience. It's how I guess the human brain works. But I can recall a really good experience when I was working with a regional manager. And if he saw anything wrong during his walk rounds, when he came to see the home, he would never, ever say it in front of a staff member or anyone. He would just keep the same, normal tone, normal sort of reaction, but he'd come in the office and say, oh, look, you actually need to do it this way. But he would always lead with, I can see you're doing an incredible job here, but in order to improve and be even better, and then he would add the observation. Yeah. So it was never pointing fingers, it was elevating that person up and then saying, but do you know what? If you just do it this way, even better. And yeah, there was fantastic, the results, but also the respect for that person as well was always there.
And one of the things that we always forget, or I find a lot of people forget, is that the issues that we're experiencing in our aged care workplaces and even disability or any other care workplace is that we're actually not alone in a lot of these challenges. No matter where we go in another health system or another organisation, even if it is out of the sector, a lot of the challenges that we're experiencing are actually quite common. I used to be a Navy sailor, and let me tell you that a lot of the issues in there, when I was there at least, it was definitely a very challenging experience where leaders were definitely a lot more toxic and it was very hierarchic, a lot of hierarchy. And I experienced some very terrible leaders that caused me to have to leave due to poor mental health, and I got a medical discharge for that. But I also experienced the best leaders who really tried hard to build me back up and would take time, even though they were commanders in the system. And I was a very low bottom of the rank, very low bottom. And they would take the time to sit with me, bring me into their office, and just really talk to me as a human. So no matter where we go, there are always going to be good and bad leaders. And the more we spend, the thing I love about the aged care space is not only do we have the space and capacity to be the leaders and identify bad leaders and then role model ourselves on what not to do, but also find the good leaders and also align to the best cause ever, which is supporting older adults. So
correct, and very well said. And I think you mentioned there, which is really interesting, but you mentioned about decision making moving sort of up the chain, and what impact does that have on day to day in terms of, when you look at it from authority, and I always use the word authority. I think as leaders we have a responsibility to amplify the intelligence of those that work around us, but also to support them in the best way we can. I heard from, I think it's one of the books that I've read, I think it was John C. Maxwell, but it was something regarding your strength is defined by your lowest denominator. So the team member who comes in that day, depending on how they're feeling, that's your strength. So you need to look to uplift them, support them. That defines your capability. But I guess, that question of what do you think in terms of, and you mentioned it before about, authority and that drifting upward, what impact does that have day to day?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, a lot of the most amazing information lives with our frontline teams. And if we can't help them translate it into systems, into policies and processes that make a difference, then the organisation isn't going to be effective as possible, and leaders aren't going to be able to give the funding and the systems to where it is going to have the biggest impact. So if the middle managers aren't listening to our frontline teams or they're not good at how they translate that into executive language and funding language and to how the government advocacy needs to happen, then it's going to fall a bit flat. So the best middle managers are those that become really effective translators and really understand where the messaging needs to go and how they report that. And then that's how the best leadership systems in that middle management can really have the biggest effect.
Nice. You just touched on the answer to the next question, which is pretty good. But in terms of, you talked about, we always talk in aged care about the bad, the ugly, what's gone wrong. But if we talk about what good looks like, and this is really important for our listeners and also for providers listening, what are the signs they're actually getting this right?
For me, I've always found it really effective to look at what's going wrong and how not to do it. And then when I find what it is that I don't like, I then look at the exact opposite. And then I also look at other sectors and other industries that are doing it better. And if we can learn from those systems and learn from those observations and then bring that into our own personal way of doing, then there's more scope for us to actually create a bit more momentum. But it's really interesting because we know that a lot of the funding comes from shiny launches and shiny pilots, not only from the government, but also within the organisations themselves. But the organisation is so busy undertaking compliance and admin and governance that the reality of fixing what's already broken can really come at a cost of trapping those into really poor systems, trapping decision making so it goes around in circles and doesn't actually get fixed, but also ensuring that the government and the organisation might not be listening in the way that we want them to. And so there's that ongoing burden of financial costs, but also a governance cost and a leadership cost. So if we are, looking at things in a way that leverages change and changes that narrative and looking for those bright, shiny voices and aligning ourselves and learning from them, that's where I see a lot of the change coming. But at the same time, if we don't have the space to undertake this listening and this reflection, then how are we then going to create a better workplace and a better team structure and better care systems?
That's right. I think it's always important, and there is a big fear, and I know this fear factor still exists today, speaking to managers and speaking to candidates that we're trying to place. But if they do get something wrong, the fear of putting their hand up and saying, if you're my manager, Samantha, I've got this wrong, you just don't want to do it. You just go sideways. You go to other facility managers, and it could be the same organisation or different organisations. Say, hey, what would you do here? Maintaining confidentiality, but what would you do here? And you try and troubleshoot it. You try and, but it's that fear of, okay, if I go to my manager, it's going to be deemed as a, sign of weakness that I'm incompetent. And that could potentially be used, when we're discussing my 6 months probation, or if we are talking about, an annual, bonus or how that looks like. So I think there is a big fear. I think we need to scrub that out and try.
So true. And I know you're going to be on board with this with me, but why are we doing it as 6 month or yearly check-ins with the team when we need to be doing more regular check-ins to really build strong teams? Like I've had, no matter what team I've been, had accountability for, I always made sure that I had at least monthly check-ins with every single person that was there, and then and ensured that they were the ones leading it. If we aren't putting in place really good accountability, not only through KPIs, but also how they want to grow as leaders, then really are we creating the best workplaces for them, and why would they stay? It's not only about the relationships that they're building with people who are wanting to receive the care and the family members, but if that elder moves to a different provider, then why would that person stay? Because they love the relationships. And if their relationships are the only thing in the relationships that are lifting them up are those that they're receiving from the people that they're supporting on the front line, then we're missing such a massive opportunity. We need to build such amazing cultures within an organisation. And it's so hard because it's really stuck with HR teams, people and culture teams, and sometimes change management. And if we're not building a really robust system where people can look at how they want to grow and also providing them with choice instead of saying, you need to do this government compliance, you need to do this CPD for your professional registration, this is the next compliance that we need to complete. Oh, you've asked for this, it's a leadership course, it's going to cost us $3,000 and it's also going to take you off the floor for X number of hours. We can't actually afford that. Like, I've had those types of conversations happen to me myself, and it's been really frustrating because I'm the one who wants to grow and I'm the one who wants to not only improve myself as a leader, but then pass that learning on to those around me in my team, and also the people who are beside me, who are the other leaders who also come to me for advice and support. So if we aren't producing change and ensuring that we're creating that space, then we're really creating and reinforcing the gap that exists in the middle management layer.
Yeah, really well said. Very well said. I can recall before having my own business and being a facility manager and even going for job interviews, and you're speaking to the managing director, and this was a smaller provider at the time, and he said to me, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I said, well, I hope to be regional manager by year 2, 3, and then I hope to, potentially sit in your chair. Maybe it's a bit brash to say, but I'd like to be, chief operations and, in year 5. And the interview went well. Got feedback from the recruiter that allegedly, interviewed, pretty well out of all the candidates, but they couldn't support my growth plans. There was no regional manager because there was only 2 sites at the time. Now there's 5 sites, but also, so I was told, I was actually told by this recruiter, Mark, you interview well, but can I give you a bit of feedback? And I'm always willing to listen to feedback. And they said, can you be less ambitious when you go for an interview? And I thought, right, it's not really me. Sort of can't, lie. I tend to wear my heart on my sleeve, so I can't really, equally, I'm not going to say on the first interview I want to be, a shareholder and sit on the board. But I think, you need to have that progression, like you've mentioned there. Yes, it could be a cost of a course, but I think organizations that get it right understand that they're growing leaders that are going to give them loyalty. They'll be loyal to the organization. They'll also, and guess what? If that leader does a $5,000 course and stays there 2 years, but passes their knowledge on to the team at the facility at site, they've got their return on investment.
And a lot of the organisations in Australia, they're also quite flat. So they might also not have those regional growth or those state opportunities that people really want to step into. And I was talking to a leader recently, like, it doesn't matter that you're small. I know that you're a leader that supports growth. And if someone chooses to move on for a better opportunity because it supports their career and their ambitions, then you're going to support it. And if you can create space for that person to be seen and celebrated, you're creating such an amazing organizational culture so that when the opportunity arises that is that next step up for them in your organization, they're going to come back and they're going to bring not only institutional knowledge from when they were there before, but also so much more because they understand the context and they understand how you're growing. So there's so much more that we can see. And I've seen amazing leaders here in Perth who, when someone leaves, they celebrate them and they welcome their choice to move, they welcome their choice to continue to grow, and they welcome them back with open arms when they've come back into the organisation for that next opportunity. So there's so much we can do.
Correct. I agree. This is an interesting one, and I've seen posts 6 months ago, 12 months ago, and it's always an interesting topic. But really keen to pick your brain. Staff engagement surveys. Uh, is it good information that's derived from it? Good data, or is it just a tick in the box?
I think it just depends on how the organisation actually responds to it. I've been involved in analysing the data that organisations get from those surveys. And a lot of what the comments that came back with in those surveys was, why should I respond to this? Because how did you create change last time? And then when the executive responds like, but we did create change. And my response to that executive is, how did you communicate that? If you're not showing the response for the survey publicly, and then continually updating your teams around the projects that align to it, even if they're still existed prior, but how does that flow into their feedback and their growth, then it actually doesn't exist. Employees don't see it, so they don't see the culture changing and they don't see the feedback being responded to. So I love employee feedback surveys, but if you're not going to respond to them and you're not going to communicate and you're not going to share the different projects that are happening within your organisation, then really, what are you doing it for?
Yeah, true. Very well said. I wanted to ask you this one, and it's a bit on email etiquette here. And we all have managers and we have bigger teams, but what are your thoughts when you ask somebody to do something, but I call you copy in their line manager where you don't really need to do that? What are your thoughts on, like, I call it email etiquette, but it's like me asking you to do something and knowing that you can do it, but first finding out whether you have the capacity, or are you booked for the next 2 weeks because you're doing a project, and you're already at capacity. So finding out first. But what are your thoughts on someone sending an email to someone else, but then copying their manager or half the organisation in on the email?
I guess it just depends on who's actually the one asking. If it's the CEO asking, then you have to look at what your priorities are, how that sits with the CEO's priorities and your KPIs as well, and then discussing that with your line manager before you respond. But if it's from someone who is around the same leadership level, it's then looking at how that aligns to your current priorities, and then also looking at where do you find joy and strength in the tasks that you're doing, and do you have space to actually take that on? Because if it's something that drains you, if someone asks me to get on a finance project, it's going to drain me. If someone asks me to sit on a people or a communications project or something that aligns to a leadership initiatives or RAP projects, then I am 1,000% in and I'm going to drop everything that I can to make sure that I'm involved. So it's about how quickly you can move and pivot. But the piece around CCing everyone in, it's what does the culture in the organisation really look for? And how can you be part of challenging that culture and creating a new one that actually builds more respect in? So there's a lot of layers there. So it just depends on which lens you want to take and which solution you want to find.
Great, very, very well said. You talked about this before, and I wanted to talk about this again, if you don't mind. And it was a very vulnerable moment in your career when you were helping multiple people at a time where it was extremely challenging during COVID. Now, you said that building that movement almost broke you. What did that actually feel like at the time?
Yeah, so the initiative was called NextGen, which was through Leading Age Services Australia, which was the peak body. Now it's gone through multiple iterations and now called Aging Australia. That movement was one that I was so aligned to with my soul. I found so many amazing people who had a passion for advocacy, change, and a real passion and love for the aged care system and for supporting older adults. And so I found myself really lit up around creating change and doing everything that I could to really create change and create opportunities for people to see the impact that they were making. That the feedback that they were giving was actually going to the right people in the right places and being listened to by the right people. But what I found was, so that initiative was launched in maybe May or June 2019. And then it really got a bit of momentum. And then the next year, COVID struck. And Laser knew that that was happening from that COVID was going to strike around December, that they could see the challenges that were happening and they were coming up with a lot of indications around what the impacts could be for the organisation. So what I found was COVID really made people only listen to the channels that they wanted to listen to. And then the Aged Care Royal Commission was happening at exactly the same time. So a lot of people's efforts were going towards the Aged Care Royal Commission war rooms, where providers had to respond to those, and all the peak bodies were in those discussions day in, day out. And the projects that I was putting forward and that the community that was being built, the next gen community, was more around how young people wanted to be involved in the solutions, how we had a network that was ready to be involved and provide insights around how to build better succession plans, and the initiatives that we had created to actually start building towards that, and the momentum that was being built. But because COVID, funding, Royal Commission, and all the lockdowns that were happening, things just really made it where you felt like you were stuck in the mud. You would put forward a report, you would get feedback, but then every time you followed up, there was always another fire that was being put out. And so you just stayed stuck. And I was someone that would, no matter what time someone called me, 10 o'clock at night, they were part of the network, I'd pick up the phone, answer them, give them coaching, give them support, make sure that they had the next outreach ready to go. So I felt like I was just being stretched and pulled in so many different directions that I wasn't creating space for myself. And at the same time, we were under an order within the organisation that we had to stay at home. So I was quite isolated in a physical sense, but I could jump on a call with anyone that I wanted at any time. But I'm someone who really lights up when I'm in physical space with someone, because I love baking for other people. I love just sitting around for a coffee for a bit to hear how they're going about their day. So there was all these different factors that really made things like I was stuck. And there were promises that things were going to get moving, things were going to change, or I was going to be able to bring people into certain discussions, but something would always come up. And it wasn't that it was a wrong reprioritization, I completely understand, but it didn't change the impact that it had on me.
And you mentioned you obviously poured so much time, blood, sweat, and tears into making the project work. You just mentioned there, leaders calling you up at antisocial hours way beyond the 9 to 5, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, and you're still answering and being able to deliver that service. So it's definitely would be very taxing on someone to absorb all of that, as well as live your own life as well, separate to obviously your responsibilities at work.
Yeah, and I mean, it was something that I never put a boundary in place. So it's made me more aware of the boundaries that I need to self-select into, because no one else can put those boundaries in place for you. And also being very clear with the leaders that you're reporting to is how it's impacting. And even though it's out of your control, that there are impacts into how that affects you and affects the projects, and it also affects the trust of the network and the stakeholders that you've got. So that's some of the learnings that I'm really starting to implement through my own work, and ensuring that stakeholders and leaders can better communicate the impacts that are happening, even though they don't have control around the new compliance measures or legislation changes or funding effects, all of those types of things.
Yeah, great. And if you were sitting with a provider right now, what's one thing that you believe they need to take seriously over the next, 6 to 12 months from a leadership perspective?
It's a really good question. For me, it's around how they are empowering their middle managers to see the impact that they're making. A lot of time, providers, either community care or residential, put a lot of pressure on their middle leaders. And when they put that pressure on, they're providing them with redesigned KPIs, expecting them to redesign projects or get new people involved or exit and redesign and restructure complete teams. So having that lens around how you're empowering your team to have those discussions and allow them time to reflect and practice those discussions. And if it's not within your own organisation, how are you creating those safe spaces for them to go to their own peers or organisations like mine, or other mentors in their network, so that they feel like they have the tools that they need to get that job done. And they don't feel guilty about it, because when a CEO has these types of situations, they most likely get coaching, they get support, and they have the chair to lean on. They have a very strong CEO network of peers. And if we're not creating that for our middle managers or those in the senior leadership team, then you're not building in an effective leadership pipeline and building a really strong succession network.
Right, I think a lot of the times leaders are very fearful to even share knowledge because they believe that they might be superseded their role. So I think you've mentioned it there in terms of your capabilities and the start of working in organisation, that local governance, that local clinical governance. But you've made a really good point there. I think the moment that people feel supported, heard and understood, but also that their goals are taken into consideration, I think it's important. And there is alignment and there will be a good fit. So we often talk about this when we're speaking to providers, and I've said to them time and time again, if there's a job opening and you want us to send resumes the next day, we're the wrong firm for you. But if you want us to understand more about your organization, and we might ask you some obscure questions like, do you have a medication management policy, or dignity of risk policy? They might ask why, but because we want to know that our managers are supported, and they have the tools. Or what is the after hours policy? If they do need to stay on site for a critical incident requiring their presence on site, is there a time in lieu policy?
That's right. Yeah, it's a really good thing. Like, I've had a lot of time I meet middle leaders. A lot of them are asking, who are the best leaders to work for and who are the best organizations to work for? And I can honestly say, hand on heart, that the leaders that I'm aware of that are great leaders, they're the ones that are cultivating these types of reflections for their teams. They're the ones that are lifting them up. They're the ones that are creating and ensuring that those policies and processes that you just mentioned are in place, so that not only is the organisation protected, but their leaders are protected, and they've got something to hold themselves to, so that they're not stepping over the line. They're creating safe spaces, and they're showing what the best practice is within their organisations.
I agree. Well, thanks, Samantha. That was a really valuable conversation. I think there's a lot in here that people will take away. I really appreciate your time.
No, thank you very much. And if anyone has any questions about what I do, so I work with small and medium aged care and community service organisations on workforce development, leadership capacity, and middle manager development, and really looking at that in a very structured way. So I work around within a fractional advisory capacity or as an embedded partner. And I also run community events to ensure the middle managers are really building strong networks, not only within their professional cohorts, but also across professional and organisational boundaries. So get in touch if that's something that you're interested in.
That's right. Thank you, Samantha.
Thanks. Thanks, Mark.